Okay, let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really significant passage, 2 Samuel chapter 12.
Ah, yes, a powerful chapter.
It really is. It's this incredibly intense, pivotal moment in King David's story.
Mm-hmm.
You get so much packed in here, drama, consequences, and, well, some reactions that might surprise you.
Definitely. Our plan is basically to walk through the text itself, pull out those key moments, the insights that really stand out.
Right. So it kicks off with the prophet Nathan going to see David, but he doesn't just, accuse him outright.
No, he uses a story, a parable. It's quite a strategic move, actually.
Yeah, sets up this scenario, gets David to make a judgment,
Hmm.
essentially setting a trap for him.
Exactly. So Nathan tells him about these two men living in the same town. One guy is rich, very rich. The text says he has a very large number of sheep and cattle. Just imagine, endless flocks.
Total abundance. And the other man,
The other man is poor, and he has nothing, well, almost nothing. Nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought.
and the description of this lamb is so detailed, isn't it?
It really is. It emphasizes the connection. It says the lamb grew up with him and his children, shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms.
Wow.
And then Nathan just states it plainly, it was like a daughter to him. So you get this incredibly strong picture of emotional attachment. This isn't just livestock, it's family.
Okay, so then a traveler shows up at the rich man's house.
Right. And hospitality back then was, well, it was a huge obligation. You had to provide for your guest.
But the rich man,
The rich man, even with all his sheep and cattle, he refrained from taking one of his own to prepare a meal. He wouldn't diminish his own wealth, not even slightly.
so instead,
Instead, he goes and takes the poor man's only lamb, the one that was like a daughter, and he
Right.
prepares that for the traveler.
ugh, it's just taking the most precious thing from the most vulnerable person for absolutely no good reason.
Precisely. And David hears this story, and his reaction is, well, explosive. The text says he burned with anger against the man. You can almost feel the heat coming off the page.
His sense of justice is immediate, fierce even, when it's about someone else's actions
Yeah.
anyway.
Completely. He swears this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die.
A death sentence.
Yeah.
Just like that, based on the story.
Pronounced with God's name invoked, no less.
No?
And he doesn't stop there. He adds a penalty on top of it, or perhaps as an alternative punishment.
Right, the restitution part.
He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, David declares. And he explains why. Because he did such a thing and had no pity, no compassion. That's what infuriates David.
And this is the moment, the pivot, after David lays down this incredibly harsh judgment.
Nathan just looks at him and delivers maybe one of the most devastating lines in the entire Bible. You are the man.
Oof. Imagine hearing that, the weight of it. And Nathan isn't just giving his opinion here, is he?
Not at all. He makes it clear. He's speaking for the Lord, the God of Israel. This is a divine message.
And where does that message start? It starts by reminding David of, well, everything.
Exactly. God, through Nathan, recounts the blessings. You were anointed king. I delivered you from Saul. I gave you Saul's house, his wives. I gave you authority over all Israel and Judah.
It's an overwhelming list of gifts and status.
And then there's that line that just drives it home. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. It highlights the sheer scale of God's generosity towards David.
So standing against that backdrop of incredible blessing, what's the core accusation?
It cuts right to the chase. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? It frames David's sin not just as, a personal mistake, but as contempt for God himself.
And the evil is explicitly linked to Uriah and Bathsheba.
Oh, absolutely explicitly. Nathan doesn't mince words. You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own.
He even adds that detail.
You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. It clarifies David's method. He didn't wield the blade himself, but he absolutely arranged for Uriah's death in battle. He orchestrated it.
So the judgment follows. What are the immediate consequences God lays out?
The first one is chilling, and it directly mirrors the crime. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house.
Because he used violence.
Because he despised God and took Uriah's wife through violence, violence will now become a fixture in his own family, his own lineage. It's a direct echo.
And it's not just some abstract future threat. It's going to be personal, internal.
Yes. God says, out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity upon you. And then it gets even more specific and public.
This is the part about his wives.
Right. A consequence designed to contrast sharply with David's secrecy. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight.
Because David acted in secret.
But God says this humiliation will happen openly, in broad daylight before all Israel. It's about exposing the hidden sin and making the consequences public, just as the impact on Uriah and Bathsheba, while initiated secretly, had public ramifications.
Faced with all this direct divine judgment, what's David's response?
It's incredibly concise, just 5 words in Hebrew, I believe. I have sinned against the Lord.
No excuses, no justifications.
Okay, just a straight confession. And Nathan's reply is, in one way, remarkably quick.
The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die.
Which is huge, right? David just pronounced a death sentence for the man in his story, but he himself is spared that ultimate penalty. There is forgiveness.
But there's always a but, it seems.
There is. The consequence isn't wiped away entirely, especially concerning the public perception, the damage done. Nathan continues, but because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord your utter contempt.
So because his actions brought dishonor, gave God's enemies ammunition.
The son born to you will die. The sin had public fallout, it caused others to mock or scorn God, and tragically, the consequence for that specific dimension falls upon the child.
And this isn't just a prediction. It happens.
Yes. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child, and he became ill. The judgment begins to unfold.
And how does David react to his son's illness?
It's a picture of intense, desperate grief and supplication. He pleaded with God for the child. He fasted. He went into his house, spent his nights just lying on the ground.
Completely consumed by this.
Utterly. He's begging God, trying to change the outcome through prayer and self-denial.
His household tries to intervene. His advisors, the elders.
They do. The text says they stood beside him to get him up from the ground. They try to get him to eat something, but he refuses. Won't budge, won't eat. He's just locked in the state of pleading and sorrow.
And this goes on for days. Until the 7th day.
On the 7th day, the child dies. And now, David's servants, they're actually afraid to tell him.
Why? What are they worried about?
Well, they saw how intensely he grieved while the child was still alive. They whisper among themselves, basically saying, look, he wouldn't even listen to us then. If we tell him the child is dead now, what might he do? He may do something desperate.
They're genuinely scared of his reaction. Maybe self-harm or just a total breakdown.
Exactly. But David's sharp. He notices the whispering. He puts 2 and 2 together.
And asks them straight out.
Yeah. Is the child dead? And they have to give him the news. Yes, he is dead.
And this is where that unexpected turn happens, the one you mentioned at the start. His reaction is not what the servants feared.
Not at all. It's completely counterintuitive. The moment he gets confirmation of the death,
He gets up off the ground.
gets up, washes himself, puts on lotions basically, resumes normal grooming, changes his clothes, and then what does he do?
He goes into the house of the Lord and worshiped.
Think about that. From lying distraught on the floor to active worship. It's a stunning sequence.
But then he goes home, asks for food, and eats. Just like that. Back to the routines of life.
It's almost jarring, isn't it? And his servants are, understandably, completely baffled.
They have to ask him.
They do. Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat. It just doesn't make sense to them.
So David explains his logic, and it's very pragmatic, stark, maybe.
It is. He says, basically, while the child was alive, there was still a chance. There was hope. Who knows, he thought. The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live.
That hope fueled the fasting, the praying, the lying on the ground.
Right. But once the child died, that possibility was gone. The situation was final, so his logic flips.
But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again?
He recognizes the irreversible reality, and then that poignant line, I will go to him, but he will not return to me. It's acceptance, looking forward to his own eventual death and reunion, but acknowledging the finality of this loss in this life.
So after this incredibly intense personal tragedy and David processing it in this unique way, the story moves again, back to Bathsheba.
Yes, the other person right at the center of the original sin. The text says David comforted his wife Bathsheba.
An act of care, perhaps reconciliation after their shared loss?
It seems so. And then it adds, he went to her and lay with her. And out of this union, after all the sin and judgment and grief,
comes new life. Another son is born, Solomon.
And right after mentioning Solomon's birth, the text adds this incredibly significant little note. The Lord loved him.
Wow. Given everything that just happened with the first child, that statement is huge.
It really is. It signals grace, a future, a different path. And Nathan, the prophet who brought the judgment, he reappears.
Right. With another name for Solomon.
Yes. God sends Nathan, because the Lord loved the child, to give him the name Jedediah.
Meaning loved by the Lord.
Exactly. It's this powerful affirmation of divine favor and purpose emerging right out of the ashes of the tragedy. It really sets the stage for Solomon's future role.
Okay, so we've had sin, confrontation, judgment, grief, acceptance, comfort, new life, and the chapter shifts gears completely. Almost abruptly.
It does. Suddenly, we're back to the military campaign. We cut to Joab, David's general, fighting the Ammonites at Rabbah.
And Joab's having success. He's captured a key part of the city.
Yes, the royal citadel, and crucially, the text mentions their water supply, which, in a siege situation, basically means the city's fate is sealed.
So Joab sends word back to David. What's the message?
He tells David, essentially, look, I've got them cornered, I've taken the water, you need to come now.
Come and finish the job.
Right. Muster the rest of the troops and besiege the city and capture it. And Joab gives a reason, quite frankly.
He doesn't want the city named after him.
Exactly. He says, otherwise I will take the city and it will be named after me. He understands the politics the king needs to get the glory for the final victory.
So David does. He gathers the army, goes to Rabbah, attacks, and captures it. And the spoils are mentioned.
Yes, particularly the crown of the Ammonite king. The description is specific. It weighed a talent of gold, that's a massive amount, maybe 75 pounds, signifying immense wealth and power.
And set with precious stones.
And this crown is taken and placed directly on David's own head, the very symbolic act of conquest and the transfer of sovereignty. Plus, they took a great quantity of plunder besides.
Okay, but then there's the description of what happens to the people of Rabbah. And it sounds, well, harsh.
It does sound harsh to our modern ears, certainly. The text says David brought out the people who were there and set them to forced labor. Specific types of labor are mentioned, with saws and with iron picks and axes, and also made them work at brickmaking.
It sounds like subjugation, putting them to hard labor under Israelite control.
That's how it reads, yes. A common practice in ancient warfare, perhaps, but still starkly described.
And this wasn't just for Rabbah.
No, the text explicitly states David did this to all the Ammonite towns. It was a policy applied across the conquered territory. Then David and the army head back to Jerusalem.
So what a chapter. It covers so much ground. How do we tie all these different threads together? You've got this deep personal sin, the confrontation, the divine judgment, the repentance, the forgiveness, but also the consequences. The intense grief, that very unexpected way David handles the finality of death. Then the comfort and new life with Bathsheba, culminating in Solomon. And then immediately pivoting to this brutal conclusion of a military campaign. What does it all tell us about, well, about David, about consequence, justice, grace, leadership?
It definitely shows that consequences are real, even when there's forgiveness for the ultimate penalty. The death of the child is a devastating consequence flowing from the sin's public dishonor.
Yet at the same time, there's that clear note of grace. David's life is spared, and God explicitly loves Solomon, the child born from that same union. It's a complex mix.
And David's response to grief is fascinating. That shift from utter despair when there was hope to this pragmatic acceptance when hope was gone. It challenges our typical ideas about grieving, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And then you have this tension between David the grieving father, the repentant sinner, and David the conquering king, imposing harsh terms on the Ammonites.
Exactly. The chapter doesn't smooth it over. It just presents these different facets side by side. You see the complexity of this leader, capable of profound personal feeling and what seems like pretty ruthless political action.
It really forces you to think about the ripple effects, doesn't it? How one action can echo through a family, affect how others see God, lead to tragedy, but life still goes on. Grace appears, duty calls.
And accountability. It's complicated here. David confesses he faces severe consequences within his family, but he remains king. God forgives his sin in terms of eternal standing, but the earthly repercussions play out. And new hope, Solomon, emerges directly from the relationship that caused the crisis.
And that resilience, or pragmatism maybe, that David shows after the child's death, how does that connect, if at all, to his actions as a conqueror right afterwards? Does processing loss in that way change him, or are these just separate spheres of his life? The text leaves you wondering.
It really does.
So we've journeyed through 2 Samuel 12, from Nathan's parable hitting its mark, through the divine judgment, the terrible consequence, David's unique grief and recovery, the sign of hope in Solomon, and ending with the stark reality of conquest.
It's a chapter that definitely doesn't give easy answers. It paints a very human, very complex picture of leadership, faith, failure, and consequence.
So here's something to maybe chew on after listening. When you consider everything in this chapter, David's sin, his repentance, his intense grief, his seemingly abrupt recovery, and then his actions towards the defeated Ammonites, what does this narrative challenge you to think about regarding power, responsibility, and maybe the sheer human capacity to hold both deep sorrow and a kind of arch resilience all at the same time? Definitely something to reflect on.